President Trump, the federal government has made numerous policy changes affecting the LGBT community and people with HIV. These range from attempts to prohibit transgender people from serving in the military to changes in the definition of genders or marriage. A study on the effect of those changes has just been completed by the Fenway Institute at the Fenway Community Health Center. We'd like to welcome its Director of Health Policy Research, Cahill. Thank you very much for being with us, Sean.
Thank you, Chris.
Sean, you looked at so many things here. My mind is pretty much, boggled by it. But where's the tipping point of us saying all these changes really are going to affect a large number of people?
Yeah, so as we know from the report we published a few months ago with the Boston Foundation, a large percentage of the Massachusetts population is LGBT. Among young people, it's about 15% among young adults. And having the federal government portray transgender people as a threat to military readiness or unit cohesion, which is what the Trump administration is doing, I think it affects more than just the transgender people who are trying to serve in the military and defend their country. I think it affects transgender people more broadly. It's basically saying they're less than, they're a threat in some way. And we just went through the ballot campaign in November, and thankfully we got through it with a strong majority of Massachusetts voters saying, no, we're going to keep a non-discrimination law in place. But I still think having the president portray it as a threat to national security or military readiness is not a good thing for people to hear. It doesn't do good things for their self-esteem or sense of belonging in society. One
of the other areas where you're looking at changes of policy under Trump is in the guidelines for educational settings, Title IX.
Right.
What are you concerned about there?
So Title IX is a 1972 law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And over the last 15 years, the federal courts have interpreted some forms of anti-transgender and anti-gay discrimination to be manifestations of sex stereotyping and therefore prohibited by Title IX. And so under the Obama administration, the Department of Justice and the Department of Education put out a regulation informing school departments that they needed to allow transgender students to access educational opportunities in accordance with their gender identity, and that includes access to locker rooms and restrooms. And the Trump administration has reversed that policy. But in addition, Secretary DeVos, the education secretary, has said that a transgender student who files a complaint and says that their Title IX rights are being violated, their sex stereotyping or sex discrimination rights are being violated, that the Department of Education is not going to even consider that complaint.
Well, another policy you're concerned about is, I guess I would describe it as regarding a conflict between the religious freedom of a healthcare provider and the need to get treatment on the part of the person that they're serving. What are you worried about there?
So what we're worried about is that under the Trump administration, there's been a number of executive branch actions that are promoting religious-based discrimination based on sincerely held religious or moral beliefs in provision of services, including healthcare services. And what the Trump administration is doing in sort of the broader conservative religious movement is they're taking free expression of religion, which we normally think of as protecting your right to go to church or synagogue or mosque, your right to practice your religion in your home and in your private life, and they're saying that that also protects your right to behave in certain ways in the workplace, to refuse to hire people based on religious beliefs, to refuse to serve people, to refuse to do certain provide certain kinds of health care based on your religious belief. And we don't think that's what the Founding Fathers meant when they talked about free exercise of religion. And we think it sends a really, it sort of sets a very dangerous precedent. It's like with the wedding cake case, which was decided a few months ago by the Supreme Court. Some people say it's just about a wedding cake, it's just about a baker's freedom to decide who to serve. But it's really about broader access to public accommodations and to goods and services in our society.
This has been the news. We're talking with Sean Cahill from the Fenway Institute. What I see looking at these in a group, Sean, is almost like the Trump administration, sincerely or not, is trying to sort of uphold a certain kind of climate about what's good and bad. So what does that mean for the people that you work with?
Yeah, what I think is going on is that a number of administrations have put out anti-gay policies. A lot of Republican administrations, the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton's administration, He signed the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996, which prohibited federal recognition of same-sex marriage. He codified the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy in 1993. But we've seen a lot of anti-gay policies under the Presidents Bush 1 and 2, under President Reagan. But what's different with the Trump administration is that those presidents got elected with, in the case of Reagan and the Bushes, with the help of the religious right. But Mike Pence is actually from that movement, and he's sitting in the White House. You know, he's the vice president. He's a heartbeat away from leader of the free world, and he's a true believer. He really believes that equal rights for LGBT people are a threat to the religious freedom of social conservatives, which I don't believe is true. But because he's a true believer from that movement, I think that the religious right has much more power and clout in this administration than we've ever seen before.
The other thing that is going on in some of these policy changes is just the non-recognition of any gender status other than male and female. Why is that such a big deal for some people?
Yeah, a lot of people are challenged by the complexity of gender. And, you know, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, a lot of well-respected professional associations acknowledge that the vast majority of people are male or female. You know, their gender identity is the same as their sex at birth. But for a small minority of people, that's not the case. And so for transgender people, their gender identity differs from their sex at birth. Intersex people are actually ambiguous in the sense that they don't fall at the male end of the spectrum or the female end of the spectrum, but they fall somewhere in between. And those people exist, you know, and they've always existed. And so when the administration says we're only going to recognize male and female, that has a real world impact. It actually increases the vulnerability of transgender people. I'll give an example. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, it's been a best practice for the last several years to place a transgender woman in a woman's prison. She's less likely to be sexually assaulted in that setting. She's safer from physical and sexual violence. The Federal Bureau of Prisons under President Trump has reversed that policy. And now they're putting transgender women in men's prisons where they experience high rates of sexual violence and physical violence. And usually the prison administrator's response is, let's put them in solitary confinement. But that does incredible damage to your mental health, to be kept in a tiny cell 23 hours a day, never interact with other prisoners. So that's not a solution either. But that's an example of the impact of this policy of only recognizing male and female.
This has been the news. We're talking with Sean Cahill from the Fenway Institute. Sean, one other change here. The president recently appointed a federal appeals court judge down in Louisiana. He has a pretty low opinion of gay marriage. He's way down there. Does that affect us at all?
Oh, sure. I mean, a federal court judge anywhere in the country can have can issue a ruling that has a national effect, and we've seen that happen time and again with immigration policy, with LGBT equality. So it certainly does, threaten. And that's another area of concern for us. The Kavanaugh nomination to Supreme Court Justice got a lot of attention. President Trump has appointed 2 Supreme Court justices, and they're both, they didn't have a lot of detailed record on LGBT equality, but there were enough indications we were concerned that they would rule in the opposite direction. They come out of the conservative movement and conservative judicial circles. So we were very concerned about that. And we just saw yesterday when the Supreme Court refused to take up a lower court ruling on transgender people serving in the military. Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, the other Supreme Court justice, were part of that 5-4 ruling by the Supreme Court not to challenge that policy, but to let it stand for now.
And I'm thinking, I heard there's something like 9,000 people in the military who were affected by that. And the military, it's a career opportunity that people are going to be missing out on.
It's a career opportunity. Patriotic Americans want to serve their country, want to defend their country. Rand Corporation and other research organizations have looked at the issue of transgender people serving in the military. Does it affect unit cohesion? Is it a threat to military readiness? And they've concluded that it's not. So there's really not any rational reason to keep transgender people out of the military. But the Trump administration is, is convinced that somehow they pose a threat.
Well, there are a lot more details on this. You've got this online.
Yes,
People
we
can
have it
check
on
that
our
out.
website, fenwayhealth.org.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Sean Cahill from the Fenway Institute. In a moment, we'll hear about a new stage production at Hibernian Hall in Roxbury.